All right, have fun.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our championship final round of Extemp. And to our speakers, congratulations on being here. And I just like to go over some time signals. So I'll be giving the time signals. Since you have 7 minutes of total time, I'll start with when count down. So it'll be five, four, three. If I can get my three, maybe not. Three. There we go. Two, one, 30 seconds, and then the jazz hands for the last few. Is that all right? Are we good? You can see me? All right. And if my esteemed panel is ready, we shall begin.
Alongside speech and debate, I participate in the extracurricular Model United Nations. Doing Model United Nations, I learned a lot of interesting facts. For example, did you know, according to the World Bank in an article published on January 5th of 2022, cities contribute to over 70% of the world's greenhouse emissions? That is a really large amount of greenhouse emissions for the whole world, just from cities. Which leads me to today's question. What is needed to quicken the transition between non-renewable to renewable energy sources within cities? And the answer to that, commitment. All we need is commitment to quicken this transition. This commitment can be displayed in the following three ways. First, committing to green infrastructure. Second, committing to subsidies. And third, collaboration. Let's get started by talking about how we can commit to green infrastructure to promote the transition between non-renewable and renewable sources. First, we'll talk a little bit about bicycle lanes, and second, we'll talk about public transportation as two methods of green infrastructure that can be implemented. When we look at bicycle lanes, an article published by People for Bikes on March 2nd, 2023, discusses a 5-year project they took on to help promote the development of protected bike lanes in the United States. Protected bike lanes within cities would mean that it is more feasible for people living in those cities and residents to take the bicycle lanes rather than always taking a car. In fact, an article published by Politico on March 23rd, 2023, discusses how during the COVID pandemic, countries such as in the European Union implemented more bike lanes as people weren't using cars as much anymore. In fact, car heavy cities such as Brussels, for example, implemented 40 kilometers of new bike lanes as a result. We can see that bicycle lanes are one great example of green infrastructure that can be implemented into cities to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and reduce the use of non-renewable energy. Second, when we look at public transportation, an article published by the City of Phoenix on March 23rd, 2023, discusses celebrations for receiving a grant of $16.3 million to support the inclusion of low and no emission buses and supporting infrastructure. The city already has 500 heavy duty buses that rely on alternative fuel options, but the implementation of more low and no emission buses will help elevate public transportation to make sure that people have the option to take public transportation, which in itself helps decrease greenhouse emissions by a lot. But taking low emission or no emission buses will help quicken that transition even faster. Now that we've talked about how we can commit to green infrastructure to support this transition, next, let's discuss commitments to subsidies. First, we'll look at subsidies for the US, and second, we'll look at subsidies for the European Union. When we look at the US, the World Economics Forum published an article on March 13th, 2023, discussing the US Inflation Reduction Act. And this act commits to $400 billion of investment and subsidies into helping lower greenhouse gas emissions and accelerating the process on, on, on renewable energy sources. So if the US can commit to this act and ensure that investments are actually being taken to quicken the transition between non-renewable to renewable energy sources and promote renewable energy sources overall in cities, this will help quicken this transition. Now, looking at the European Union, another pretty big emitter, An article from Reuters published on March 16th, 2023, discusses how the EU is starting plans to put subsidies in place to help decrease the amount of CO2 producing hydrogen fuel cells. Most hydrogen fuel cells are produced through the use of fossil fuel emitting processes, but the EU is hoping to start plans to help limit that and bring that down and support the process of CO2 free hydrogens. This will be done through subsidies to help decrease the overall cost to ensure that the private sector will be willing to take on these projects in comparison to the currently cheaper CO2 option. By committing to subsidies such as this, it will help support the transition to renewable energy sources in a more clean way, which we will see the benefits of within cities worldwide. Now that we've talked about subsidies and how we can commit to them in order to help support this transition, next, let's discuss commitment to collaboration. First, we'll talk about Sustainable Development Goal 7, and second, we'll talk about public-private partnerships. When we look at Sustainable Development Goal 7, an article published by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace on January 31st, 2023, discusses the African Union's efforts to work towards a cleaner transition to clean energy, and particularly Sustainable Development Goal 7, and how that's been implemented throughout the continent. However, this is not a goal that can be reached on their own. It's very important for the world to help out. And in fact, at COP26 in November of 2021, the US, the United Kingdom, the EU, and several other states committed to joining the Just Energy Transition Partnership to help promote the transition from non-renewable to renewable energy sources. Beyond that, public-private partnerships overall are beneficial as a collaboration tool in committing to lowering the transition from non-renewable to renewable energy sources. An article published by the World Economics Forum on March 17, 2023, discusses how the government and private sector should collaborate on this issue, citing examples such as the Climate Pledge, which includes 375 companies over the span of 30 countries committing to cutting emission costs to zero by 2040. And this includes strategies such as finding ways to make the development of batteries even cheaper. Now that we've talked about commitment to collaboration, next, let's wrap up by discussing what we talked about today. Today, I answered the question, what is needed to quicken the transition of non-renewable to renewable energy sources in cities through commitment. First, green infrastructure, second, subsidies, and third, collaboration. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Speaker 1. And our next speaker is Jonathan.
Yes.
Congratulations, Jonathan.
Thank you.
I just want to go over the time signals since I will be giving them to you.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. And so I'll give you when you have 5 minutes left, I'll count down. So 4, 3, 2, 1, half, and then the jazz hands are the last 10 seconds.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
When you're ready, you may begin.
It is no secret that the United States Congress is very old. And no, I'm not talking about the body of government itself. I'm talking about the people who make up Congress. As one example is Senator Dianne Feinstein recently announced that she is no longer running for re-election as she is 89, turning 90 years old. Additionally, the minority party leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, is 81 years old and still serving. And according to NBC News on March 4th, 2023, it states that the 118th Congress is the third largest Congress since 1789. And this has raised questions on how representative Congress is actually of the American people, demographically speaking. Which brings me to today's timely question: should the US include age caps in Congress? And my answer is yes, because the members of Congress should not only be representative of the people ideologically speaking, but also demographically as well. So we're going to answer this question using three lenses of analysis. First, we'll look at how Congress is very old compared to the rest of the American population. And then secondly, we'll look at how this will make way for new ideals to be represented in Congress. And then finally, we'll look at how this actually has a lot of public support. So let's first discuss how Congress is actually very old compared to the rest of the United States. Because again, Congress is meant to represent us not only in the way of how we think and political ideologies, but also representing how America looks like in general. And according to the Wall Street Journal on March 19, 2023, it states that Capitol Hill lawmakers remain as near record highs in terms of the average age for the Capitol Hill lawmakers. As in the Senate, the average age is 64 years old, and in the House of Representatives, it's 57.9 years old. And compared to the rest of the American population, the article goes on to mention that the rest of the United States and the average age of Americans is about 38 years old. So there's a huge disconnect between the ages of our Congress people and also the general American population. Furthermore, Politico as of March 7, 2023, notes that since 2003, the average age of members in Congress, especially the House of Representatives, has increased by 4 years. And for the Senate, it increased by 4.5 years. So not only are the people serving in Congress are getting older compared to the rest of the American population, but this trend is making sure that, again, the people in Congress are getting older and older, making a larger disconnect between the ages of people who are supposed to represent us and those who they are representing. And finally, BBC as of March 6, 2023 states that with much older members of Congress, this puts health concerns at one of the top priorities because it basically determines whether or not our representatives can actually do their job or else they'll have to be sidelined as a result of their age. And again, this Congress is the third oldest since 1789, so health concerns could be real fear posed to our Congress because they might not be able to actually do their jobs. And so, therefore, Congress needs to implement age caps in the United States government so we can make sure that the United States government is actually representative of its people and there's no age disconnect. So now let's move on to discuss how this will make new waves for new ideas to come through in Congress. Because again, Congress is supposed to represent everybody, ideologically speaking, but also demographically. And younger people have their own set of ideals because they face their own set of problems. And according to The Hill on January 30th, 2023, it states that younger generations actually have a difficult time not only getting their ideals represented in Congress, but actually getting into Congress themselves, since they have to go up against large established politicians. And this creates a lot of barriers because if young members of younger demographics can't actually get into Congress and face all these barriers, that means that they won't actually be able to represent the ideas that affect them and that need to be addressed. Furthermore, the New York Times of March 6, 2023 states that Maxwell Frost, who is the first Generation Z member of the United States Congress, is actually the youngest member in Congress. And compared to the rest of other generations like millennials, there's only 58 millennials serving out of 535 seats in Congress. So that just shows that a lot of the American population, who is millennial and Gen Z, who are set to become the biggest voting base, are actually not well represented in Congress, since they face barriers to actually getting in the first place. Therefore, their ideals won't actually be represented. And finally, the Washington Post as of February 16, 2023, states that younger voters like millennials and Gen Z are ready to start making an impact in politics, but since they don't actually have people representing them in terms of people in their own group, they're actually not able to make a lot of impacts, and many of the issues that they care about will go overlooked, especially things like student loan debt relief and other issues that younger voters tend to care about. So therefore, Congress needs to implement age caps in the United States government so the younger generation can actually be well represented. So now let's finally discuss how this actually has a lot of public support. As according to CBS News on February 9, 2023, it states that a poll conducted by CBS News stated that there's actually a lot of bipartisan support to implement age caps in Congress, as the poll suggested that 73% of Americans supported the idea of having age caps in Congress. And especially during a time where we are so politically divided and basically cannot agree on anything, it's very telling when the American public all unites together and says, yeah, we should have age caps in Congress. Furthermore, the Business Insider, as of January 24th, 2023, states that age caps are actually nothing new in the United States, as 31 states, including the District of Columbia, have their state judges in their state courts actually have to retire by the age of 75 years old. So this isn't exactly something new in the United States Congress, in the United States government, and could easily be implemented into Congress. And finally, Fulcrum, as of February 13, 2023, states that Americans want younger leaders that actually represent them demographically speaking. Because when we have younger leaders that represent people, not only in terms of their ideology, but of how they are, that means that their issues will be put front and center. And American voters have been wanting younger leaders. That way, our voters and our representatives are not out of touch with the current issues. So therefore, Congress needs to implement age caps in Congress so we actually have people who are not out of touch in government. So today I answered the question, should the US introduce age caps in Congress? And I answered this with a yes, because our leaders need to be in touch and representative of the people demographically. And I answered this question using three lenses of analysis. First, we looked at how Congress is actually very old, especially historically. And secondly, we looked at how implementing age caps will make way for new ideals that represent the American population. And then finally, we took a look at how there's a lot of public support, especially during a time of very large division.
All right, Izzy. You're our next speaker.
Hi, can you hear me correctly?
Yes, and can you see me? I'll be giving you your time signals.
Okay.
Can you see me there?
Yes.
Okay, so when you get to, I'll count down. So 5 minutes left, all the way down, one, then half, and then the last 10 seconds. Okay?
Okay. Would you be comfortable if I timed myself?
I have no problem with that, but I'm required to get the time signals. So.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, and we'll just set this up here. Okay. Despite the many jobs that are being added to combat the unemployment problem, the economy has seen that unemployment rates have risen from 3.4%, which was an all-time low since the late 50s, to now 4.2%. It seems that the government wants to tackle this problem by adding more jobs. But is adding more jobs really doing anything, as the job market is reaching its peak downfall this year? According to the Employment Development Department of California in March 10th of 2023. Now, given the current state of the job market and how unemployment is rising back up again, the important question must be asked. What should the US do to maintain our competitive job market in the face of recent layoffs and financial worries? The answer to this question is the US shouldn't focus on providing more jobs. They should tackle their economic problems and provide more compensation. And today, we will analyze this through three key lenses of analysis. First, we will look at how the economy should be stabilized. Second, we will address the problem with the Great Resignation. And finally, we will look at why there needs to be more compensation benefits instead of more jobs. So first, let's tackle the economy. According to PBS News in March 14th of 2023, consumer prices have rose by 6%, food prices by 0.3%, and there's a quarter-point hike in interest rates. Now, inflation is still a great problem our society is dealing with. And as inflation rates increase, the consumer motivation for spending decreases. And if consumers don't want to spend, that's exactly what leads to the downfall of a competitive job market. And especially if the Federal Reserve is trying to increase its interest rates, this is going to have terrible effects for everyone involved. According to the Peter G. Peterson Foundation in February 7th of 2023, wow, what a name, 48% of people in poverty earned less than half of the poverty threshold. So 18.2 million% of the population of the US live in poverty. And it actually affects pretty disproportionate communities, mostly happening in Hispanic and Black households. So we can see that the US has to tackle this poverty problem as well and make sure people are having enough money to get out of this poverty. According to the CNBC News in March 9th of 2023, credit card debt has hit $930.6 billion, and an extra $3.4 billion in interest charges will happen in the next 12 months. So we've outlined three different problems with the economy right now. We've outlined inflation discouraging consumers, credit card debt, and people still living in poverty. We need to stabilize this first before we can fix the job market. So now let's actually talk about the job market and the current trend of the Great Resignation. The Great Resignation defines a period of time where we're seeing more people quitting and leaving their jobs, strikes going on. According to the Business Insider in February 18th of 2023, over 47 million people quit their jobs in 2021. And 70% of Gen Z says it was because they didn't receive enough benefits. The trend going on is quiet quitting, resigning because they aren't receiving enough benefits. According to Crunchbase in March 24th of 2023, more than 118,000 workers were laid off from big tech companies. Companies like Amazon, Google, and Meta contribute to this quitting culture as people at the top continue to receive more, and it is the people who struggle to survive are barely making a living wage. Finally, we can see that according to Business Standard in March 20th of 2023, the toxic quiet quitting culture is going to continue to affect Gen Z in the 2030s. These are the people that are going to consist of the job market. And if they are feeling discouraged already, we have to motivate them to start working more if we want to see more competition and growth. We have to address the quiet quitting toxic culture and the Great Resignation period and make sure people of Gen Z are motivated to have a stable career. Finally, our last key lens of analysis will be more compensation. As I've stated before, it is great that we have more jobs in the market, but it is essentially not going to do anything if people aren't receiving the benefits they deserve. According to Al Jazeera in March 21st of 2023, the LA school district had over thousands of people protesting within the last months. And it was because workers were demanding a 30% wage increase. We can see that this is just one of many strikes that have been happening. When we think about the railroad workers, the nurses, these are all groups that aren't being given enough benefits and compensation to continue working. The money they are making from these jobs isn't enough to survive. And that is why we go back to the first point of stabilizing the economy first before worrying about competition. It's not about the quantity of jobs. It is about the quality of benefits and compensation someone is able to receive so they can be motivated to work more. Today, I chose the question, what should the US do to maintain our competitive job market in the face of recent layoffs and financial worries? And my answer to this was we need to stop providing more jobs and we need to worry about providing more compensation and benefits and tackle the bigger problems in the economy before we focus on competition. We outlined this through three key lenses of analysis. We first looked at what problems face our economy. Then we addressed the Great Resignation period and quiet quitting culture. And we finally looked at strikes going on in the LA school district and the compensation that people are demanding. This is an uncertain time for us all, financially, but it is the government's job to make sure we are all able to live comfortably and securely.
Thank you, Izzy, and congratulations on making it to the championship round. All right, our next championship Extemp speaker is Kim.
Hi, can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, and congratulations for making it.
Thank you.
And can you see me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. I'm going to give you your time signals. So when you have 5 minutes left, I'm going to count all the way down. This will be the 30 seconds and then the last 10 countdown.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. And when you are ready.
When we think of everyday household supplies such as rubber gloves, nonstick cookware, and sponges, we think of them as helping our lives and making them simply better. However, what most people don't realize, they're filled with chemicals. Specifically, there's one, PFAS, or per and polyfluorinated substances. This is a very active ingredient that's man-made that found as many coatings and products we see in our everyday lifestyle. A recent study in 2019 discovered 98% of the US population contains PFAS in their body. And while most of the chemical companies simply say they aren't harmful, what the EPA has recently discovered, it leads to very mild ailments such as headaches or stomach aches to very serious diseases like kidney disease, cancer, and thyroid dysfunction. Yet, there's been a stride in making PFAS eliminated from the household items. In February of 2023, the Biden administration recently proposed over $2 billion for the removal of PFAS and other harmful chemicals in our drinking water. So with that in mind, we must ask today's question. Why has the EPA been slow to remove PFAS from drinking water? And the answer is very strategic because this is a non-action strategy to remove this forever chemical that's in our bodies as well as our household items. Additionally, there's been multiple global disruptions that really taken the eyes from this really harmful disease, such as the Russian-Ukraine war, inflation, and other tactical affairs. Yet, there's three reasons why the EPA has been so slow to remove this harmful chemical from our drinking water. First, it's the first ever move by the federal government. Second, it needs Congress approval. And lastly, it affects us all. However, there's very little consequences for those profit-driven operators. The first reason why it took the EPA forever to remove PFAS from our drinking water is this is the first ever federal mandate launched to keep our water safe. Axios on March 14th, 2023 does confirm PFAS is not just a simple chemical the public water system and other chemical companies can just remove from their everyday situations. However, PFAS, it has a family of 6 compounds and 12,000 different types. This isn't just a really quick removal process. It's very lengthy and would take a whole remake over on the infrastructure. Additionally, this mandate doesn't remove it completely. It states it's only allowed 4 parts per trillion gallons of water. Thus, they're still allowed to use that chemical just in very small amounts. Well, while this is the very first standard from the federal government, it takes lots of rules and regulation to get it backed by not just a public water system, but other types of bottled waters that will use this plastic and this chemical as well. The second reason why the EPA took forever to remove PFAS from our drinking water, it needs Congress approval. So Congress needs to authorize certain government agencies like the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, on rules and regulations. David Ross, this year of the EPA, does state the regulatory process to determine if a chemical is harmful is very lengthy. It takes lots of meetings and basically lots of rules and findings before a chemical can be harmful from the EPA. Thus, it also needs approval from Congress to state this is harmful. Of course, it needs research, data, and sources to understand why this is harmful, not just to us, but also to the planet as well. Additionally, in 1974, when there was a Safe Drinking Water Act, they want to make sure this is improved and better to ensure the drinking water for the everyday public keeps them safe. But the last reason why it took the EPA forever to remove PFAS is it affects us all. However, there's very little consequences. CNN on March 14, 2022 does state, while the EPA will monitor all the PFAS and other chemicals in our drinking water, it'll only notify the public if levels go above the normal standard. While this is a very bold step and historic for a pressing environmental issue, the public water system, it only has 3 years to comply within a date of regulation. They get no immediate consequences. They can take their sweet time on this new rule and regulation because they understand how long it takes for a regulation to even get approved by Congress. Additionally, well, it's not the public system water's fault for the PFAS. They really see us as a threat. They would rather work with Congress as well as the EPA to ensure drinking water is safe for them because it simply wasn't their fault in the first place that PFAS got into the drinking water. Returning back to today's proposed question, why has the EPA been slow to remove PFAS from drinking water? This is a very non-action strategy to remove this very forever chemical. However, there's 3 main reasons. First, this is the first ever mandate by the federal government to remove a forever chemical. Second, it needs Congress approval, which will take forever to deem a chemical harmful. And finally, it affects us all. However, there's very little initial consequences when it comes to the public water system or any type of profit-driven water that makes bottled water. We must realize PFAS, it's never going away. However, we need to realize what's in it when our drinking water will be contaminated so we can remove it from our lives. Thank you.
All right. And our final speaker in the championship Extemp will be Janelle. Congratulations on making it to the final round.
Thank you.
I'll be giving you your time signals. So it'll be 5 just when you left. So I'll count down 5 left, count all the way down when you have 30 seconds, and then the last 10 seconds. All right? When you are ready.
Spring break. We all love it. It's time off work, time off school, and just time to enjoy life in general. And while we might think most people might be enjoying it, this isn't necessarily the case in one city, Miami Beach. For the third year in a row, Miami Beach is struggling to contain the violence that comes with the spring break people coming over. According to an article published by NPR on March 19, 2023, the city has recently set a curfew from Sunday at midnight until Monday at 6 a.m. in order to combat the recent gun violence that has happened within Miami Beach, which led to the 2 shootings that happened over the past week. Which leads us to today's timely question. Should Miami Beach disincentivize spring break vacationing following recent gun violence? And the answer to this is yes, because the people are paying the price. And we will look at this through 3 lenses of analysis. By first, looking at how residents just don't want it. Second, looking at how businesses suffer. And finally, third, looking at how this makes the city and its officials look bad. Our first point to consider is how it just makes residents just don't want it. Because there's so many people coming over, it makes life within the city unbearable. According to an article published by the Wall Street Journal on March 20th, 2023, Alejandra Vega, a resident, says that life in the city becomes so unbearable because of the amount of traffic that vacationers come and cause, along with them littering the beaches and causing fights within the city. People that live there don't want to keep paying to live in a city that only encourages this type of violence. They want to make sure that they're living in a safe community that actually cares about them, because all of this violence ultimately just leads to the inability for people to go out into the city that they already live in and enjoy the life that they have. Furthermore, according to AP News on March 20th, 2023, there have been at least 322 arrests and 70 firearms that have been confiscated, at least, which means that when we have all of these guns out in the public running around, we have people who are fearing for their lives, which ultimately means that the residents are in a very unsafe position. Overall, if people are in an unsafe position, then they are fearing for their lives, and this just isn't a good thing for residents to be having. They don't want to keep paying for this, and this is something that they would want to take up with the city. By disincentivizing this, we can make sure that residents feel safe so that they keep living in the city and they can keep helping the city and just make it more safe. Therefore, because of the reason that residents just don't want it, is why Miami Beach should disincentivize spring break vacationing within the city. Now that we've discussed how residents don't want it, our second point to consider is that businesses suffer. Now, businesses are a major part of the city because they make them a lot of money and the city likes money. According to ABC on March 19, 2023, it states that with the new curfew, people must leave businesses at midnight, except for the exception of hotels or emergency services. Now, basically what this just means is the fact that if people have to leave businesses early, businesses aren't going to be making money off of, let's say, the people who go out into the streets and just buy a midnight snack. This is a lot of revenue that they're losing, and businesses are going to be really mad about it because they want money at the end of the day. Additionally, according to CBS News, on March 23, 2023, the Greater Miami Beach and Beaches Hotel Association states that they want to make sure that the city is not getting a bad name because of its reputation. When associations have to step in and make sure that corporations are also coming together to fix a city's problem, this isn't necessarily a good idea because corporations don't usually stand for the good of the humanity, which means if they have to get involved, this is a very serious problem. And so because of the reason, it's mainly because their businesses just aren't doing that well, which is costing them money and they get mad. Additionally, according to Daily Mail on March 20th, 2023, it states that people have been trashing almost slushy shops even to this point. So we're seeing that basic mom and pop businesses are being hit too, as well as corporations. This isn't good for anyone. People are losing money, and for small business owners, this means that they won't be able to pay for their basic necessities. Therefore, because of the reason that businesses suffer is why Miami Beach should disincentivize spring vacationing within the city. Now that we've discussed how businesses suffer, our final point to consider is that it makes the city and its officials look bad. When you get this type of violence, it creates a reputation, which means that in the future, people just aren't going to want to go to Miami Beach because of its violence. According to Bloomberg on March 24th, 2023, the Miami Beach mayor states that he ultimately wants to make the city unappealing as possible to make sure that he is restricting the sales of alcohol. His job is on the line because at the end of the day, he's going to either get reelected or not, but his political future is at stake. And so this is something that he is going to want to take over and make sure that he is focusing his attention on it because his career is on the line. as well as the city's career, because there's always someone higher up than the mayor who's going to want to take it out on him. That's just not good for him. Additionally, according to the New York Post, on March 22nd, 2023, there have been 371 police officers working the weekend for a small city. 371 police officers is a major number considering how small the city is, which means if you have that many people working in a tiny city, the city isn't safe. And this gives the city a really bad reputation and ultimately makes it unsafe. When we look at other examples, such as Cancun in Mexico and all of the violence there, we see that Americans just don't want to start traveling to these places because it's unsafe. When we apply this to Miami Beach, we can see that people eventually aren't going to want to keep going to Miami Beach because of all the gun violence. So this makes it look bad in the future, and it hurts its reputation and the city's reputation. Therefore, because of the reason that it makes the city and its officials look bad, is why Miami Beach should disincentivize spring break vacationing in Miami. So today, we looked at the timely question: should Miami Beach disincentivize spring break vacationing following recent gun violence? And the answer to this is yes, because the people are paying the price for it. And we saw this through 3 lenses of analysis. By first, looking at how residents just didn't want it because it made them unsafe. Second, looking at how businesses are suffering because they are losing money and the revenue. And finally, third, looking at how this makes the city and its officials look bad, which can cost them their jobs and their reputation in the future. When we go back to the idea of spring vacationing and enjoying our time in the sun, we have to make sure that we're doing it in a safe way that will want to keep people going for a long time. Miami Beach needs to address this problem, and it needs to do it now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, my fellow judges, and thank you all of those of you who watched the live stream. And congratulations again to all our finalists.